So I played d5 in order to open the center. As we know, when the enemy king is stuck in the center, you want to open up the center to get to it. So now the engine is thinking, and we'll see what it comes up with. So the machine took the pawn as expected. I did a little bit of preparation for this, and I thought that was probably the best option. Now I'm expecting the machine to go back to e1 because the king is really just in the way on e2. So let's see what happens. Okay, everything's still going as expected. I prepared to go e5 just to grab some more space in the center. That was a surprise. I thought knight c3 would have been automatic, but instead the machine wants to trade queens, which makes sense. So if your king is under attack, you want to trade queens, and white's king is vulnerable because he can't castle anymore. So the machine's move makes sense. Now I gotta figure out what I want to do. So I looked at my options. For starters, I would not want to play e4 because then white just plays knight of c3, hitting both the pawn and my queen. So I take its queen, it takes my queen, but white likes queen trades. And also this would get my pawn out of the center, and I'm facing knight c7 check, so e4 is no good. Trading queens on f3 just helps white. White's trying to get rid of the queens. I looked at playing queen back to d6, but after a quick bishop c4 and then knight f6 and then knight c3, white's going to probably force some more trades on the e4 square. So I'm going to face some trades anyways. One last idea I looked at was that if I take at f3 and then knight takes and then push e4 to dislodge a knight, he has knight g5 and then there'll still be bishop c4 hitting my pawn down there. I think that my best option is knight to f6. So I'm allowing a queen trade, but it's a trade that takes place on my terms. And this trade would bring my knight to the center. After some thought, I think I want to play bishop to e6. So the idea is that, well, the first one I looked at was knight to b4, hitting c2. And after king d1, after king d1, I wanted to play bishop f5 in order to provoke d3. That would just cage in this bishop back here. What I didn't like about that is that the bishop could, first of all, find a home out on g2 where it could have this nice long diagonal. And then after kicking back my knight with a3, then the d5 square is weak. So that did not seem ideal. I also looked at briefly just trading on c3, but then just recapture the pawn and now I can challenge my center with d4. So I think this is my best option. I'm expecting bishop to c4 in order to try to force some more trades. In that case, I can go either here or here, and then trade pieces on e6. My knight's still in the center, and I still have more space. I guess the machine wants to challenge my bishop by playing knight c3 on the next move. Okay, Stockfish, if you want to play knight c3, go ahead. You'll just weaken your d4 square. I'm going to play rook c8. What I was concerned about was bishop takes, pawn takes, and then my pawn c5 is pretty vulnerable because you're just gang up with things like knight a4 and b3, bishop a3 stuff, With my rook on c8, though, I can always take with the rook, and now c5 is defended. Let's just develop in castle. Maybe the machine wants to play here to fight for d5, but that would allow takes, and that would leave the queenside majority for white crippled. I think the idea behind this move is to play bishop c4 and then capture with the pawn if I trade. So I'm just going to castle, and if he tries to trade bishops, I'll probably just go knight d4 so that I can recapture like this. The reason why I don't want to trade out the bishop c4 takes is that this would just give white a grip on the d5 square. Let me try to explain what I mean when I say that this trade would cripple white's structure. So if that happens, white's going to have a majority on the queen side. White's going to have 4 pawns over here, and I have just 3. I would have a majority on the king side. So you have 4 against 3. Now after that trade, these guys in the future could create a passed pawn. It could go here, 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 sometime in a distant future, and that passed pawn could become a new queen. Now white's 4 pawns over here cannot do that. That's why I said the structure was crippled. So even if white somehow advances maybe a3, b4 someday, I have to play b6 and no further progress. So that's why if I take on c4, white's not going to play d pawn takes. Now, just erase all these arrows here. Now if instead, if I take there, white's going to take with this pawn. But they still can't create a passed pawn. But my pawns over here can't create a passed pawn either. So I go like here, here, this pawn's going to stop me. So if the trade happens this way, the b pawn taking the bishop, then there's no crippled majority. And that b pawn over here would now help I control d5 square, which I don't want to have happen. That's why I'm playing here. And the computer responds instantly with king to d2. Am I winning material with bishop checks, king back, here, here, takes, hitting both the king and the rook? Computers don't miscalculate stuff, but even if somehow not winning material, worst case scenario, I could just trade bishops after move this to king. Just trade bishops. And then I'll play rook to d8 to control d5. I'm just going to reinforce my center. My last move might have been a bit inaccurate. My original intention was to meet knight b5 with this, but then after this, I missed the white has knight f5. Then he's trying to recapture the bishop, and also threatening a nasty knight e7 check. So I gotta go take this bishop. And now I just trade on b5. So I'm expecting pawn takes, and this pressure on the a file could be unpleasant, but I can get out of it. So after pawn takes, I play rook a8, and then white can play maybe king b2 or something, try to pair move the other rook to the queen side. Then I come play a5, takes, rook takes, pawn takes, and my passed a pawn over here is going to be an asset, not a weakness. Okay, I missed something again. So my original idea was a5 takes, pawn takes, but then what is very new idea of rook b1, and then come in and hunting down my c5 pawn. So I'm just going to try to take the b file, but rook b1, which I'm expecting, would stop that, and I'm going to be playing defense here. So h4 is a surprise. I believe this solves most of my problems. So now Vlad is threatening takes. So I got taken a1. So I don't want to play b6 and then, whoops, not rook a6, right, rook a7. And then my king has to go here in order to guard the g7 pawn. And my king is going to be sidelined. So I'm going to come here instead. So the white king gets a d5. I'm going to be lost, I believe. So I'm looking at two ways to stop it. I could just try to play, whoops, f5, but then he has f4. And now it's a new possible way to invade along the dark squares. So I'm going to try king e6. My first instinct was f5 check, but the king just goes back, and then f4 comes soon after a rook b6 check first, and then again white's just going to invade on the dark squares. I think a better idea is rook to d7. So I'm giving up a pawn. I could just take this guy for free, but then I have check, king goes back, take, rook c7, and I'm going to lose one of these guys. But my rook is active, and I think my king can stop this guy from promoting. So let's try rook d7. Rook c5 instantly, okay. Let's continue with the plan. Let's just take the pawn. I was planning to meet rook c7 with rook g4. Maybe that's still best. That's because rook g4 is going to cover g7 after it takes. Some ideas I might be able to play h4 someday, which would force off some more pawns, and trades bring me closer to a draw. Of course, the computer won't fall for this, but there is this amusing line, king f3, takes, push, and the pawn is unstoppable. So I think king d6 is my only chance here. I was looking at king to f5, but then what is this very annoying move f3? My rook has to stay protecting the h4 pawn, so my only move is going there. But then my rook is just frozen over there on the f4 squares, nowhere can really go. So the idea behind king f5 is that I can try to chase the rook away and then push my pawn. But unfortunately, white's faster. So after king f5, f3, rook f4, white plays c5, and then if I start chasing the rook, white ignores it, plays c6, take the rook, c7, and I can't stop the pawn from promoting. So rook f4 is no good. I also thought about playing pawn to f5, but that creates another weakness with the e5 pawn, and also gives white some checks on the 6th rank. So I think my only move is king d6. This is my only move. My other pieces are pretty much paralyzed. So white does have rook f8, with the idea being takes, 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 and then a winning pawn ending. But I just play rook f5, and I should be okay. So it goes rook c8 check instead. I'm not sure if rook f5 works, but it has to be tried. So h3 just loses a pawn to rook h8, and if king e7, then white just ignores the threat and takes my pawn. If I take the rook, then he takes my rook, and it's going to be a lost pawn ending. So rook f5, only hope. The idea is that I'll slide behind my pawn and then make a new queen. So my rook h5 plan is too slow. I play here, then c6 check, then king d6, check, there, check, there, push, push, and then rook a7, h2, I get mated. So rook h5 doesn't work. Rook f4 is only try, but it's probably going to lose. If king c7, then check, back, d6, and white's already threatening mate, so let's try this. Back when I played rook f4, the idea was I can now play rook c4, and the rook tries to restrain the pawns. Oh, I think I see how this ends. King d3, rook c5, c4, my rook is incarcerated. Yep. Just as predicted. Let's try some desperate counterplay. Maybe e4 check will somehow break things up. This shouldn't work though. The idea is king b4 to trap my rook. If I try to run away with rook a5, then d6 and white's going to checkmate me. So let's try this. It loses. The idea is king b4, take, take, push, and for a moment it looks like I'm about to promote, but white should be able to checkmate me down here in the back rank. Probably just d6 or king d6 or something like that should be enough. Oh, I push, then d6 we make. And there's nothing I can do about that. So I'll just resign. Tough game. I don't think I made any obvious blunders, but somehow I still got outplayed with the Bongcloud. Hope you guys learned something from that, and hopefully I inspired you to play better chess.